Welcome to PLACES-R, the platform for accelerated electrochemical storage research. PLACES-R describes the big lab that you see behind me, which is comprised of a glove box housing a sputtering system, a glove box housing our automated battery assembly, and a pouch cell sealing unit, another glove box housing the formulation and testing of electrolytes, and a couple of scanning droplet cells, and at the very end, there is a near ambient pressure XPS. These are all accessible through the Stories project and through normal collaborations with my group. In the following few video sections, I will guide you through some of the capabilities that we have in our lab, what they can do, and maybe how you can start some of your research or accelerate some of your research here in our laboratory located in Ulm, nearby the Helmholtz Institute Ulm in southern Germany. So what you see behind me is our sputtering system. In the following videos, I will briefly go through the different capabilities we have in our laboratory dealing with synthesis, characterization, upscaling, and understanding. What you see here again is this sputtering chamber. Here we have 4 cathodes, meaning we can sputter from 4 different metals or metal oxides in a reactive magnetron sputtering process. We have also mounted here a retarding field analyzer with a quartz crystal microbalance. With that, we can measure not just the atom or ion energy, but also measure the depth or the depth deposition rate of certain materials. We can sputter from 2 DC targets and 2 RF targets. And we have a substrate bias to the substrate, which is also done with RF, so that we can actually clean surfaces quite nicely. This is set up as a combinatorial sputtering system, so we can have intended compositional variations over 100 millimeter diameter wafers, which we then can further analyze using some of the techniques we have here or some of the techniques that you can offer. One of the standard analysis techniques that we use in my lab is X-ray fluorescence, or XRF in short. Here we have a Horiba XGT 9000, which is a state-of-the-art machine that is capable of analyzing samples of up to 100 millimeter in diameter. We have an area that we can expose to the beam of a square shape, and we have different techniques here available. With that, we can map on a very fine grid up to a few microns, even very large surfaces in reasonable time. The excitation here is done through a rhodium source, meaning that we cannot detect rhodium. We have the option here to evacuate the analysis chamber such that we can actually measure, not really quantify, down to carbon and can also measure and quantify the amount of sodium in a sample. This comes quite in handy because if we have samples that were sputtered or samples that you provide to us, we can mount a couple of them into this machine and analyze them quite rapidly. The entire data export here is done in a HDF5 file. So we actually have this integrated with our data management, which is based on CADI format, which is the Karlsruhe data infrastructure for materials science. To my left and right, you see our working horses performing Raman and FTIR spectroscopy. Both systems are capable of housing and measuring samples of up to 100 millimeter in diameter that can again be in square shape format. For the Raman, we have a red and a green laser, and we can measure it up magnifications of up to 250. For the FTIR, we can measure only at about 50 magnification, which is just inherent to the FTIR technique. This FTIR has a special detector that can measure 32 by 32 spectra in a hyperspectral imaging setup simultaneously, and thus allow for very, very rapid measurements of large areas. As you can obviously tell, these are just in normal lab air, since we also have a setup which copies the 2 exact same functionalities in the glove box. So that is also, again, a system in which we can mount 100 millimeter diameter samples, and we can measure there with a red and a green Raman laser, and also using FTIR spectroscopy. This system is called HITS and is housed in a dry nitrogen atmosphere. So behind me, you see our XPS. Our XPS is a little special, and as you can maybe tell by the height of my head, I'm not a very small person, that this is fairly large. Why is this so large? Well, this is a near ambient pressure XPS. That means we can measure XPS at pressures of up to 100 millibar of pressure. We typically try to limit this below 50 millibar, which allows, especially for battery researchers, to employ some studies, not just in situ, but also in operando through the use of some electrical feed-throughs at pressures of up to 50 millibar. So this almost opens up the use of real, normally used electrolytes. So far we have done studies with PC, but we plan to go to higher pressures and widen our portfolio of different electrolytes. We can do these measurements on relatively large surface areas. I'm holding this in my hand because right now, as you can maybe tell by the red color of these LEDs, it's down for some maintenance, so they will be cleaned right after. So we have here an accessible area of 50 by 50 millimeters round on which we can measure. So we can actually load a lot of samples at once and perform also here combinatorial material science. If you're interested in really some interfacial studies, we also have the option of sputtering with argon 1000 plus clusters. This allows us to really gently sputter the surface and actually do depth profiling even for very complex and hard to understand solid electrolyte interfaces, which might be very interesting for not just lithium-ion battery research, but also some of the post-lithium applications. In the back of this whole machine is actually a fairly sophisticated data analysis suite that you can't really see because it's software, that is also tightly integrated in our data management workflow. So if you're interested in taking a lot of XPS data over several days or even weeks of time, we have the capabilities here in my lab to automatically analyze and actually curate the data in quite a nice way for you. If you're wondering, why is he actually standing in front of a XPS that's supposed to be operated for battery research? Well, it's right now in maintenance. So where I'm standing right now is usually a small intermediary glove box that connects our big glove box system to this. We have a automated robotic system that is actually loading these little pucks. So we have a little tray that can hold up to 5 of these. So if you have a very large batch of data that you want to acquire on very different samples, you can actually house them here in the glove box. Typically, our glove box is filled with nitrogen. However, if you're interested, we can fill the small antechamber glove box with the loaded samples with argon, so that you can also study materials like metallic lithium or metallic sodium. The whole system, again, is tightly integrated in our laboratory orchestration and data management framework, so that we can also just, in the comfort of our home, tell the robot to load the next sample and take another sample out. So what you see here behind the double-walled glass in our glove box is the Subsystem. With the Subsystem, you're capable of formulating very complex liquid electrolytes at arbitrary mixtures and quite precise. So this, in the base, it's a syringe pumping system that is connected to a density meter and a viscosity meter down below from Anton Paar. The syringes actually come from Zetoni, a small German company that builds very high quality syringe pumps. And it's also connected to a benchtop X-Pulse NMR from Oxford. With that, we are able to also measure the anion and cation self-diffusion coefficients. We have the capability now to extend this to not just hydrogen and fluorine cores, but through the X-band through several cores, and we can automatically change in between these cores, which allows us then to not just measure the anions, but also the cations in your very new electrolytes. We have so far measured different lithium-based salts, like Hückel-type salts, and bisalts, and we see quite some dramatic changes in the anion self-diffusion coefficients. So if you're interested in this, you can also do that kind of research here in our lab. So we're almost at the end of our tour. Let's imagine we have synthesized something, we have characterized it quite well for its crystal and chemical structure, and we know exactly what the composition is from XRF. We might now want to know something about the electrochemistry, besides just the bulk, the electrochemistry of the bulk electrolytes. Then we can go to our scanning droplet cell, which is a specialized system. With that we can measure with spatial resolution over large areas. We can also exchange the electrolytes, so we can do electrolyte formulations of these so-called half cells. So here we are not investigating full cells, but really half cells in a 3-electrode geometry. The actual measurement area, or the area exposed of your working electrode, is only 1 millimeter in diameter. And this is again done in a nitrogen atmosphere. We have an alternative system from the hardware and software exactly the same, but it's housed in a argon-filled glove box. So there we can also investigate metallic anodes or very complicated systems that might react with nitrogen. In here, the system we actually demonstrated before to be capable of active learning. So active learning means that we can, for instance, change parameters during the experiment or the formulation to optimize for a certain property. For instance, we can try to go to your sample, measure at different positions, and try to optimize the electrolyte for some SEI resistance after we applied some potential. If we know this, and let's assume we have a super optimized electrode or electrolyte material, we can also test it on a larger scale. To this end, we have built a coin cell assembly robot that is capable of assembling 64 coin cells in one batch. A batch usually takes about half a working day, so if you really want to have a lot of cells, we can go to up to 128 coin cells per day. We have an alternative system to the coin cell manufacturing, which is the so-called protocell robot. The protocell robot allows us to make miniature pouch cells that take the exact same electrodes as you would typically put in a coin cell. However, because we are using very cheap materials, because the housing of these coin cells is relatively expensive, we can go down to a cost of about 20 cents per cell, not including the labor cost, of course. That system is also quite reliable, and both systems offer the capability of taking pictures after every assembly step. So if you want to know exactly what the alignment was, or if there were some issues with the electrode, for instance, if there were some scratches, bubbles, or cracks, we can easily tell this from our data management system. So this is the last station of our short lab tour. What you see behind me is just a standard battery cycler with one small addition, and this is this robot arm. What we can do here is we can automatically and also autonomously load new cells. That is, we have special models that can predict early the lifetime of these cells and then perform the cycling accordingly. The whole system, contrary to most other simple battery cyclers around, is that we actually hook this up to our laboratory network, and we can automatically, through some API call, start a measurement, stop a measurement, and retrieve data in a semi-live form. This is really then the last step when you want to see how well your materials are performing. There's one caveat, and that you see maybe that there is no really controlled air. So we have to live with what the lab temperature conditions are. We do have some temperature fluctuations here in the lab, which is why we have an additional roughly 200 channels with active temperature control in special constant temperature chambers. Just this system is really for autonomous cycling. What I've not shown you is all the capabilities that we have besides these special tools that we offer here, such as, of course, electrode coating, a scanning electron microscope, a very highly sophisticated X-ray diffraction machine, and essentially all the different things that you would expect in a battery research lab.